Hey guys, Sean here, and welcome to the F1 Word. So Jack Doohan is out and Franco Colapinto is in at Alpine from the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix and for an initial 6 races at least. The second time already in 2025 that we've seen an internal driver swap at an F1 team, with of course Yuki, Tsunoda and Liam Lawson swapping positions in the 2 Red Bull teams. Neither change came as a huge shock in the end, but on Doohan specifically, this always had an air of inevitability about it. Long before this season even got started, the rumours began to swirl that Doohan was on borrowed time following the announcement that Franco Colapinto had signed a multi-year deal to join Alpine as the team's reserve driver. With a little help from James Vowles saying earlier this year that Alpine presented the best opportunity for Franco to be a racing driver in 26 and maybe 2025, and the CEO of the Argentine driver's prominent sponsor letting slip on a live microphone during an interview that Colapinto may make his F1 return in Imola, the speculation only became more intense. With all of that in mind, this whole thing has been expected for a while, I think it's fair to say. In fact, I even made the preseason prediction that he wouldn't make it to Miami, and although he did take part in the event, I wasn't all that far off in the end. But why now and why so early in his F1 career? Well, firstly, gotta be said, he got more time than Lawson received at the main Red Bull team, so that's something. The reality is, though, he hasn't really impressed anywhere near enough. He has been okay, which, by the way, isn't a glowing endorsement from me. It's like saying he's been fine, so not amazing, but far from the worst driver to ever grace Formula One. Unfortunately for Jack, okay or fine or not the worst isn't always good enough in this sport, and teams need to see consistent glimpses of speed and improvement if a driver is going to do enough to fend off the axe. In fairness to the Aussie, he did show signs of speed at times, but nowhere near often enough, and a mistake was never too far away. He crashed out early on in Australia, if you remember, in difficult conditions that also claimed some far more experienced scalps, including a double world champion. He didn't blow anyone away in the following races and suffered a massive crash in Japan practice, having failed to manually close his DRS before turning in and spinning off, and he retired at the start of the race in Miami after one of those lap 1, turn 1 collisions with Lawson. Unfortunate, yes, but still a DNF, more contact and another blot on his record. He was, to the surprise of nobody, well beaten by his far more experienced teammate Pierre Gasly too. The average gap between the two drivers in qualifying was just under half a second in the Frenchman's favour, and overall the race battle was 4-2 to Gasly, and even if we adjust that to be just the races they both finished, it's still 2-0 to Pierre. The qualifying battle ended 5-1 to Gasly too, thanks to that solid performance from Doohan in Miami where he outqualified his teammate to offer himself the slightest glimpse of hope, but that was all undone by turn 1 on Sunday. Alright, he is a rookie and was put in the difficult position of needing to perform pretty much immediately due to all the noise around his future, but he didn't really do that, and with F1 being a brutal, cutthroat sport, especially if you happen to have Flavio Briatore as one of your bosses, it was clearly felt by some that they had no choice but to make the switch as soon as possible. Now, I can imagine there are more than a few of you thinking, but Colapinto crashed a lot last year too, and you'd be absolutely right. His reputation took a hit when he suffered very heavy and extremely costly crashes during qualifying and the race in Brazil, and again in qualifying in Vegas. Whether or not it's true, I can't know for sure, but it was widely rumoured at the time that those incidents helped cool Red Bull's interest in the Argentine driver. He was, by the way, also beaten by teammate Alex Albon in the qualifying head-to-head 7-2. So the question is, really, is he actually an upgrade? Here's the thing, whilst he had those big crashes and was beaten by Albon, Colapinto also showed signs of very strong speed and impressed, even as already mentioned, briefly catching the eye of Helmut Marko and co at Red Bull. Across his 9 races with Williams in 2024, he ended up tied with Albon overall in the race battle, and if we remove the anomaly of Brazil, where he was more than 6 seconds off his teammate who set his fastest lap on a much drier, albeit still wet track, the average gap between the two was just 0.07 of a second in Albon's favour. He also scored 5 points to Albon's 8, even managing to pick up points in just his second F1 race with P8 in Baku, although he did also crash in practice there. So a mixed weekend, let's put it that way, that certainly ended much better than it started. So mistakes and crashes, yes, but speed, potential and impressive performances, also yes. And that is ultimately the point. He didn't have the easiest of paths to F1, just like Doohan actually, and maybe wasn't on many people's radars initially. But when he got his chance, he took it and again impressed, and that is something the paddock values insanely highly in Formula One. Of course, it's not just all about speed and whether or not he turned heads in the paddock. Let's not be naive here. Money also has a huge part to play in this decision. I know, F1 teams loving money. Who'd have thought, eh? Not that we don't all love money, but anyway. As I've already made clear, this is likely not just a financial decision, but Franco Colapinto does bring huge backing with him from Argentina. He'll also bring a big Argentine contingent of fans, which when coupled with that sponsorship, no team is going to turn their nose up at it if they have a driver on the books that carried all of that and they are looking to change drivers. As with most things in Formula One, there's never really one factor in play when it comes to any decision-making process. Again, much like money, maybe that's not exclusive to Formula One. Look, it does feel harsh on Jack Doohan. Not so much the fact that he's out after 7 races, 6 in 2025, not many drivers get that opportunity, but more so because the writing was on the wall pretty much immediately for him. So it doesn't feel like he was given a fair crack at things. An opportunity, absolutely, and one he perhaps didn't grab with both hands as he needed to. But short of battering Gasly in the teammate head-to-head, I seriously doubt he could have done an awful lot to cling onto that seat for much longer, whatever he did. That decision was inevitable, and that's my point when I say I don't think he got a fair crack at it. Under pressure before he even sat in that car. That's harsh. In the end, though, if the switch really was inevitable, what's the point in prolonging it? It's also worth a mention that, as we've already seen, at least hypothetically, this decision does have other ramifications. Oliver Oakes has resigned as team principal, and it would be naive to think the two situations aren't in some way linked. Maybe, again, hypothetically, Oakes was very much Team Doohan and felt his position was untenable as a result of the swap happening. Important to note that there has been no official word from Oakes or Alpine that is in fact the case, at least as I record this, but it would be a huge coincidence if the two stories weren't tied together in some way. In summary then, Doohan was a bit of a gamble for Alpine, and it was one that didn't really pay off in the end. Not impressing people and making mistakes, sometimes big ones, was never going to see him maintain his position with the team as second driver, especially given the pressure he was under, again, pretty much from the outset. And whilst Colapinto also made some huge errors himself during his time at Williams, he did at least manage to show that he had some very good speed and potential. Therefore, although he also may be a bit of a gamble for the team, he does bring some big financial opportunities, so put yourself in Alpine's shoes for a second. You've got two driver options. Doohan, who makes mistakes, is a risk and the jury is out on him, and Colapinto, who also makes mistakes, is a risk and arguably the jury is still out on him too, but he brings a ton of cash and potentially a huge fan base with him. What are you doing in that situation? Surely you're taking the money to help offset those risks, right? Now throw in the ability he showed, crashes aside last year, and it suddenly looks, maybe not quite, but almost like a bit of a no-brainer. Same risks, but with some extra money coming in and potentially a quicker driver with maybe even a higher ceiling. In which case, whilst it may seem tough on Doohan, why wait any longer to make that change? Especially when you consider just how tight that midfield fight is going to be this year, they are going to need every point they can get. It is also important to remember in all of this that Alpine have a lot more data and information than we mere mortals have, so they may also be seeing something in the simulator, Doohan versus Colapinto, that we're not seeing. Having Colapinto do at least the next 6 races means the team has a direct comparison between the two drivers in that car and on an actual racetrack in actual Grand Prix too. So making this call now is a good opportunity to assess them both properly. It's also kind of a no-lose situation in many ways as well. If Colapinto succeeds and does do what he needs to do, the swap is justified. If he fails, the team can still swap them back if they want to, although we don't tend to see that happen all that much, do we? Usually once you are out, but of course there are exceptions to that rule. On that note, one final thing. All this talk along the lines of should Doohan have been given more time, or Colapinto is the best, sign him up, or even why are drivers being ditched so quickly these days, even though that's been a thing in F1 for a lot longer than Red Bull's young driver management and this Alpine switch. But don't ignore someone else in all of this. No, not Flavio Briatore, although he has proven successful in brutal driver calls in the past. I'm actually talking about Paul Aron. Hear me out. I'm not saying he should be in that car right now, so don't get me wrong on that one. But Alpine seemed to be perhaps somewhat quietly impressed with him, and he did show some really strong potential in F2 last season, even if things did drop off around the mid-season point a bit. My point being that although he may not be ready yet, keep an eye on him because he could become an option for next season if Colapinto doesn't do what the team want him to do or hope he can do. Just some food for thought before I sign off, although with Oliver Oakes leaving, someone who was very much behind Paul Aron, maybe those opportunities are going to fall away now. We'll see in the future though. That is it for this one then, but let me know down in the comments section what you make of this decision by Alpine. I imagine it's going to be a little bit divisive down there, but would you have given Doohan a bit longer, maybe to the summer break, for example? Or do you agree with me that whilst maybe harsh, there's no point waiting if the switch was likely to happen anyway? And if you are after the latest news, analysis and reaction from the world of Formula One, then head on over to planetf1.com. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.